Welcome to Cafe Stories, where mysteries come to life. Don't forget to like this video and share it with fellow mystery lovers. Let's get started. Hercule Poirot and the Game of Faces. Chapter 1. A most unexpected summons. Hercule Poirot was seated at his modest writing desk in a small but well-appointed London flat when an unfamiliar envelope arrived in the Morning Post Po. Its cream-colored paper bore a fine embossing, and the precise loops of the handwriting piqued Pooh's curiosity, even before he slit it open with his tidy letter opener. He adjusted his reading spectacles a most delicate motion, and withdrew the single sheet within. My dear Miss Pooh, it would be an honor and a relief if you would grace Farnsworth Manor with your presence. I have planned a gathering of select acquaintances this coming week, a most elegant affair. Or so I hope, yet I confess I have found myself uneasy of late. There are strange undercurrents in the household. I dare not voice them in writing. I ask for your discretion and your brilliance in discerning. If my concerns are unfounded, or if something truly unsettling lurks behind our facade of civility, yours in anticipation. Lady Elia Farnsworth read and reread these lines, tapping a finger thoughtfully on the polished surface of the desk. Lady Farnsworth's words carried an undercurrent of anxiety, something unspoken but pressing. He set the letter aside, rose to his feet, and quietly began to prepare for the journey, while the invitation seemed innocent enough. An invitation to a country fete. His instincts told him there was more beneath the surface. Poirot took pride in his little gray cells, and they stirred now with expectancy. Hercule Poirot arrived at Farnsworth Manor just as the last rays of the winter sun dipped below, the horizon casting long shadows across the frosty courtyard. Although he had traveled by train, and then by a borrowed carriage, he appeared as pristine as if he had stepped out of his own study. He wore a crisp, dark suit, an elegant create of deep burgundy, and a fine overcoat that barely showed signs of the journey. It was the close of the 19th century, and in such remote corners of the English countryside, modern conveniences were scarce, so the gentle clip-clop of horses' hooves provided a suitably old-world accompaniment to the detective's advent. The manor itself rose in the twilight, like some slumbering creature, its honey-colored stone walls and ivy-covered arches hinting at a storied past. Light glowed in nearly every window, promising warmth and company. Within, a uniformed footman stepped out to greet Poirot, bowing low, before guiding him up the wide marble steps to the grand entrance hall. The faint scent of wood polish mingled with the aroma of roasting pheasant. Gleaming chandeliers cast dancing reflections on the polished floors, and the hush of a well-run household lent a sense of hush and dignity to the space at the threshold of the drawing-room. Lady Altha Farnsworth awaited him, her gown of midnight blue velvet trimmed with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. She was an imposing figure, tall and slender, her sharp features softened by a fleeting yet genuine smile as she extended her hand. "Miss Poirot," she said, voice cultured, "'tis a pleasure to have you here at my humble gathering. I have heard such praise of your abilities I hardly know what to expect." Poirot offered a short bow and gently took her hand. "Madame, the pleasure is mine. One hears many things, but it is always better to judge by what one sees. Your home is most gracious." His accent, a soft ripple of Belgian French, lent his words an unusual charm. She guided him into a drawing-room, festooned with wreaths of holly and evergreen sprigs, reminders of the festive season just past. A gentle hum of conversation filled the air. Guests, scattered in small clusters of animated discussion, turned polite smiles in Pooh's direction. The detective surveyed them with thoughtful interest, noting the variety of faces: a portly gentleman leaning on a cane, a young woman in pale lavender, an anxious expression, an older lady wrapped in ostrich feathers, and several others whose laughter rose in bright trills above the general murmur. "Come, Poirot," Lady Elia said, escorting him toward a table laden with refreshment. "Insist you sample our local cider, and afterwards I shall be honored if you join me and the other guests in the ballroom tonight. We have planned something, well, a little whimsical." Pooh's dark, alert eyes darted toward her. "Whimsical, madam? You have piqued my curiosity," she gave a small conspiratorial smile. Yes, tonight at the stroke of midnight, my guests will all don masks and swap them amongst ourselves. It's a game, the game of faces. If you will, each person will for a few moments adopt a new visage, and she paused, leaning in with a mischievous twinkle. There may or may not be a prize for the best impersonation. It's all in good fun, of course, of course. Puo echoed with a quiet nod. And yet one's true nature can hide behind such a fine disguise. She laughed lightly, tapping him with her fan. You are quite perceptive, Miss Puo. But in such a small community as ours, I doubt there is much to unearth. He inclined his head, his small, neat mustache curving slightly. I have found, Lady Farnsworth, that in both small communities and large there are secrets of plenty. If one knows where to look. They joined the other guests who were drifting toward the ballroom. The wide arched doorway revealed an impressive space of parquet floors and tall windows now covered in rich velvet drapes. An orchestra, seated off to one side, played a lilting waltz that soared through the high ceilings. The swirl of gowns and the sparkle of jewels under the chandeliers lent a festive air to the occasion. Servants moved gracefully among the assemblage, offering glasses of champagne and plates of dainty pastries. Puo moved about, conversing politely, always listening intently to the chatter. He introduced himself modestly, smiling at polite inquiries into his little gray cells, as he liked to call his mental powers now and again. A snatch of conversation reached his ears that made him arch an eyebrow, hushed tone. References to debts or whispered suggestions of old family. Quarrels that were quickly smothered under polite smiles. But each time Puo merely offered a gentle remark and continued on filing away, these murmurs for later reflection. A few minutes before midnight, Lady Ala gave the signal for the masks to be distributed. A servant appeared with a large lacquered box, and the guests crowded eagerly around. Each drew out a mask at random. Some fierce, some comical, others brightly plumed or eerily blank. Laughter flitted about the room as the guests held the masks up for inspection, commenting on the odd shapes and colors. Remember, Hercule Poirot said softly to a small circle of amused onlookers, with the striking of midnight you must become, if only for a moment, something new. Perhaps you shall even discover a hidden facet of yourself. A young woman with laughing eyes, Lady Farnsworth's niece, perhaps smiled at him. And which mask will you choose, Miss Pooh? He politely declined to pick from the box. I fear I have come unprepared for such masquerades. My own face must suffice. She giggled, though she seemed faintly disappointed. Ah, but you would make such a wonderful masked presence. Let me see if I can find one for you. Puo shook his head with a kindly firmness. No, my dear mademoiselle, I prefer to see and not be seen the great clock in the hallway, an elaborate timepiece with gilded cherubs let out. The first sonorous note of midnight conversation fell away as each guest seized their mask and held it soft. 12 resonant chimes rang through the house, echoing across polished floors and trailing along candlelit corridors. With each toll, more faces disappeared behind colorful disguises, transforming the glittering assembly into a cairn of strangers. Some masks were gybed with shimmering feathers, others were crafted to look grotesque with twisted mouths and exaggerated eyes. Puo stepped back, content to observe. He could not help but feel an undercurrent of tension beneath the merit. It was little more than a hunch, a detective's intuition, that perhaps the swirl of masks and swirling dance steps hid more than just bright laughter. But he kept his observations to himself, for now, on the final 12th stroke, the music struck a triumphant chord, and the great double doors into the corridor were thrown open. Many guests flitted out, half laughing, half shrieking in mock alarm, desperate to avoid giving away their identities. Is that you, Elizabeth? One gentleman called, only to be answered with a playful cackle from a masked figure who scurried away. The effect was both playful and faintly eerie, like some dream where one cannot quite name the faces around them. Ko watched Lady Farnsworth, who chose a simple half-mask of black velvet that framed her aristocratic features. She caught his eye. From across the room, gave a tiny nod of acknowledgement, then disappeared into the crush of masked revelers. The detective lingered deliberately, hanging back to see if any face or any mask looked back with hidden intent. For several moments, the house was a carnival of illusions, torch-lit hallways, and candelabra. Lit rooms filled with the shapes and sounds of concealed guests. The atmosphere vibrated with excitement, laughter blending with the rustle of silk and the tap of shoes on polished floors. Someone called for the dance to continue. And more voices joined in through an open doorway. Pooh glimpsed couples twirling with dramatic flare-masked faces, craning to catch glimpses of companions they could not fully recognize. Then, amid the arie came a single piercing cry. It swept along the corridor like a sudden wind tangling with the music and shattering the cheerful air. In an instant, all pretense of merit vanished. Masks turned in alarm and conversation ceased as if severed by a knife. The violinist playing in the corner gave a squeak of dissonance and abruptly stopped. Puo straightened, tension rippling through him. A new hush settled over the house. A hush born not of propriety but of fear. It was that brand of silence which arises only when danger has truly broken in upon festivities. He stepped into the hallway. Every sense alert, masks hovered on every face, making it impossible at first glance to know who was who. The expressionless visages held a certain grimness now, their once whimsical features seeming almost menacing in the flickering candlelight. A clamor of footsteps echoed down the corridor, drawing Puo onward. He walked quickly, stepping past startled guests, searching for the origin of that cry. Somewhere in the dark hush of fans with minor tragedy had found its way in, and as the last echoes of that panicked cry faded, Puo felt a certitude blossom within him. The game offices had only just begun. Chapter 2. At the stroke of midnight, a cry in the dark at once. The entire household froze. The sudden piercing cry that had shattered the jovial atmosphere at Farnsworth Manor lingered on the air, echoing through candlelit corridors and gilded doorways like an unresolved chord. Hercule Poirot, still standing near the threshold of the ballroom, felt the soft brush of passing figures in fantastical masks who ran toward the source of that dreadful sound. Yet despite the tumult, his mind began to work with a clarity that rarely deserted him. He murmured under his breath, already it begins. Gone was the frivolity of the masquerade, the gleaming feathers, the midnight laughter, the playful guessing of identities in a heartbeat. All had been replaced by a charged silence broken only by hurried footsteps, frantic whispers, and the uncertain flicker of the wall sconces that cast long dancing shadows. Puo smoothed his mustache, took a breath, and glided through the swirling confusion. "Miss Puo," a voice came from behind him, a masked gentleman, short of breath and trembling by the slight build and anxious tone. Puo surmised it was Frederick Farnsworth. Lord Farnsworth's nephew. The young man lowered his mask, revealing a face pale with alarm. It came from the corridor, leading to the side ATI chambers. I am certain of it. Puo offered a grave nod. Then Muir, let us investigate together. We must waste no time. The corridor was lit by only a few sputtering candles. Still enough light remained to illuminate the sight that awaited them. A small knot of guests, some masked, others having hastily removed their disguises, stood in a semicircle near an ornate door. One or two ladies were visibly distraught, clutching handkerchiefs to trembling lips, while the gentleman tried to maintain composure. A hush fell the moment Puo arrived, his presence somehow imbuing the gathering with a faint semblance of order. At the center of it all, slumped against the wainscoting, lay a footman. His livery, neatly pressed earlier in the evening, was now rumpled and stained where he had collapsed in the flickering candlelight. His face appeared unnaturally still. It was clear, tragically clear, that this young man was beyond all help. A strangled SOB came from Lady Altha Farnsworth herself, who stood apart from the rest. Her mask of black velvet slipped to the side, revealing eyes wide with horror. His Hipu knelt down, placing a gentle hand on the man's wrist, though he already suspected what he would find. He then pressed his fingertips lightly at the side of the footman's neck. Alas, Madame, Puo said quietly. He's gone. A collective gasp escaped the assembled company. Lady Aaliyah's composure wavered, and she turned away, dabbing her eyes with the lace cuff of her gown. Pooh rose, giving the group a somber yet commanding glance. Everyone please return to the drawing room, he said, his voice both soothing and insistent. We must have order in the midst of chaos. Yes, let me see exactly what has happened here. No one moved at first. Fear and confusion appeared. To paralyze them, then a firm tone cut through the tension you heard. Hercule Poirot said a crisp voice. Lord Farnsworth himself, tall and silver-haired, moving a lurid mask of a mythical creature. His gaze flicked to the footman's body, and a look of deep concern flashed in his eyes. Come away, now we must let Poirot do his work slowly. The crowd receded down the corridor. Murmurs rose and fell, carrying theories and wild guesses of foul play. Poirot remained behind, kneeling once more beside the unfortunate victim. He lifted the edge of the footman's jacket, observing that there were no obvious wounds. The man's eyes were shut as though he had simply fallen asleep. Yet a single detail, the faint curious odor that lingered in the air, pricked Pooh's keen senses. He rose and spotted a faint swirl of movement at the far end of the corridor. Emerging from the gloom came a tall, stooped figure wearing the manor's livery. Another servant, apparently. This man halted as soon as he spied Poirot, wide-eyed and trembling. "Sir, I came to see what had happened." "I heard the scream," he said in a wavering tone. "John, that's the footman. He was supposed to be helping in the kitchen after the masks were distributed." Poirot regarded the servant with sympathy tempered by curiosity. "Your name, if you please." "Thomas Sear, third footman." The man's face was pale and he tugged anxiously at his collar. "Is John?" Poirot nodded gravely. "Oui, mon ami, he has been taken from this world." He lowered his voice, stepping closer to ensure no one else would overhear. "Thomas, can you tell me if you noticed anything unusual tonight? Quarrel, suspicious behavior, anything that might help me understand what befell poor John Thomas's Adams?" Apple bobbed nervously. I can't say as I saw anything, sir. The house was all in a flurry because of the masks, guests coming and going in the corridors. Some of them giggling, some of them just drifting about. I was busy serving refreshments in the dining hall. I only came down this corridor to fetch some extra candles. Then I heard a terrible scream. Poirot offered a small nod. "Very well, Thomas. I thank you. Will you please inform Lord Farnsworth that I will soon ask a few questions of each member of the household. We must not let confusion and fear run rampant." Thomas bowed jerkily. "Yes, sir, I'll do as you say." And with that, the footman hurried away, glancing back over his shoulder once as though uncertain if the sight of John's still form was real or merely a dreadful apparition. Poirot took a steadying breath and surveyed the area with meticulous care. He stepped carefully around the body, noting a slight scuff on the floor as if someone had dragged their foot in haste. A single mask lay. Not far off, an elegantly embroidered piece in burgundy and gold. Had it been John's? Or had it belonged to someone else? Discarded in a panic, he stooped, lifting the mask with utmost caution, mindful not to disturb any potential clues. The interior was lined with velvet, the faint scent of perfume clinging to it. Carefully, Pooh placed it aside, deciding he would show it to Lady Ayla or the other guests to see if any recognized it. His fingers then grazed the footman's lapel. When he pressed gently, an object shifted inside the pocket. Extracting it, he discovered a folded note. Pooh's eyebrows lifted, unfolded. The parchment to find but a single word scrolled in a neat angular hand. "Midnight." He reread the word, lips pursed, and thought the stroke of midnight had signaled the start of the masquerade highlight. Surely that was no coincidence yet. Who had slipped this note into the footman's pocket, and why? What Guo's mind teemed with questions. As he refolded the note and slid it gently into his waistcoat, a distant sound of footsteps broke his reverie. Another figure approached, Lady Ayla Farnsworth, her eyes red-rimmed but her posture characteristically poised. She held her mask in one trembling hand. "Miss Poirot," she spoke with quiet urgency. "Lord Farnsworth is gathering everyone in the drawing room as you requested, but there is such unrest among them, rumors, insinuations, I fear. Panic will soon take hold." Pooh inclined his head graciously. "Lady Ayla, I will do my utmost to keep the peace and to find out precisely how this tragedy has befallen us." He placed a comforting hand on her arm. "If you could instruct the servants to keep the household calm, it would be a great help. Fear is an unwelcome companion for the truth, no." Her voice shook. Yes, I will see to it." And Miss Pooh, you do believe this to be murder?" A tremor caught in her throat as she spoke that last word. Puo did not immediately answer. He glanced once more at the silent figure on the floor, the white gloves now stained by the dreadful finality of death. I believe he said at length that something far more sinister than an accident has occurred this night, but let us not speak of it too freely until we know more. She nodded, grief etched across her features, with a quiet instruction to a nearby maid. Lady Alia left to join the rest of the guests. Puo took a final lingering look at the scene. The stillness of the corridor, the flickering candlelight, the tangible aura of dread that hung in the air. The fateful note in his pocket seemed to pulse with significance. Yes, he thought to himself, there is a game afoot. Someone in Farnsworth Manor had counted upon the commotion of masquerading masks and midnight to cloak a deadly deed. But who among these finely dressed guests, these loyal servants, these so-called friends, would dare to commit such an act? With measured steps, Puo followed Lady Alia toward the drawing room, determined to learn what secrets might slumber behind the elaborate facades. The hush in the corridors felt too quiet, as if the house itself held its breath, waiting to see what discovery would come next. The detective, however, allowed no such hesitation to cloud his mind. He would proceed, carefully unraveling the many layers of the night's events. Each mask, each word, each movement, for he knew beyond all doubt that the masquerade of Farnsworth Manor had only just begun, and with it a test of wits that might cost more than one life if the truth did not emerge swiftly. Chapter 3: Whispered Confessions. By morning's pale light. By the time the first pale rays of the winter sun touched the frosted windows of Farnsworth Manor, the house stood in a hush of mourning, and subdued, apprehension gone, were the revelers. Laughter and the rustle of silken gowns in their place reigned a quiet tension that lay over every corridor like a fine layer of dust. Hercule Poirot, true to his meticulous nature, rose early, despite the late hours of the preceding night, and made his way down to the morning room where a modest breakfast had been laid out on a polished walnut sideboard. He found Lady Alia Farnsworth already there, her gown a somber hue of mauve, her eyes red-rimmed. From weeping, she started at his entrance, pressing a hand to her chest. "Miss Pooh," she said in a tremulous voice, "I beg your pardon, my nerves are quite afraid. We have never had such a tragedy." "Bealus here," Puo inclined his head gently, "but of course, Madame, who could remain unmoved after such a night? I trust you managed a few hours of rest." "Very little," she confessed, her voice unsteady. The household was in an uproar. No one seemed able to find repose. And of course the authorities. Her words trailed off as the sound of footsteps in the corridor announced the arrival of Inspector Barnaby, tall, with a neatly trimmed beard and an air of quiet efficiency. He inclined his head to Puo. "Miss Puo," he said, "I am grateful for any assistance you can give. We must sort truth from panic before it claims another victim." His voice was grave, underscoring the delicate nature of the situation. Puo acknowledged him with a courteous bow. "Inspector Barnaby, I am at your service." Then, with a gentle gesture toward Lady Alia, he suggested perhaps we might begin by speaking with the members of the household separately. No so many tongues wag at once. One can hardly keep them straight within the hour. The morning room had been cleared of all but Puo, Inspector Barnaby, and one visitor at a time. The first to present himself was Lord Farnsworth's cousin, Mr. Rupert Farnsworth, a man of middle years, whose refined attire belied the faint tremor in his hands. He bore no obvious family resemblance to his older cousin, apart from a certain hawkish set to his nose. Settling himself in a chair, he folded and refolded his handkerchief. "I cannot conceive," he said in a strained tone, "that anyone in this house would do such a thing. We are all friends, or at worst distant acquaintances." John the footman was perfectly inoffensive. "Why harm him?" Puo nodded thoughtfully. Why indeed? Did you happen to see or hear anything out of the ordinary last night? Swallowed nothing beyond the general chaos of that masked game. Truth be told, I was in the midst of conversation with Miss Penelope, Lady Alia's friend, when the scream echoed through the corridors. We ran at once to see what had happened, only to find poor John. Inspector Barnaby eyed him keenly. "And before that moment you noticed no disagreements?" Rupert only shook his head, and when excused he departed with a heavy sigh, shoulders sagging as he passed through the door. Next was the young A's Miss Clarissa Farnsworth, a willowy girl in her late teens, who entered with her hands clasped anxiously. She seemed torn between curiosity and fright. "I hardly slept," she murmured, managing a wavering curtsy. "Is it true? There might be foul play?" Puo studied her, faced the facts. "Mademoiselle suggests something sinister. Did you see anything unusual? Last night perhaps an argument or a figure lurking in a corner?" The girl's eyes flickered. I thought I glimpsed someone in a dark cloak near the back staircase, but we were all wearing masks. They were hurrying away, and I wasn't certain if it was a guest playing the game, or she shivered. I left immediately. Pooh thanked her, and exchanged a glance with Inspector Barnaby, who scribbled a note in his leather-bound notebook. The butler, Mr. Hughes, came in next, a dignified man with impeccable posture, and a carefully measured speech. "Sir, Miss Farnsworth," he said, nodding in deference. "I can only say that the household staff was as taken by surprise as any of the guests we had now." Warning no inkling that anything amiss was afoot, Puo scrutinized him. "Can you recall John's demeanor before the tragedy? Did he seem distressed, or perhaps carrying out a task that put him in harm's way?" Hughes shook his head with a calm certainty. He was instructed to collect empty glasses from the library after the masks were distributed if he left that duty. It was not at my direction, one by one. Puo and Inspector Barnaby spoke with an array of guests and servants, a scholarly fellow, Mr. Gardner, who claimed to be searching for a rare volume in the library, Miss Penelope, who could barely speak for weeping, and a footman named Thomas, whose face still bore the shock of discovering his fellow servant's body. Each told a slightly different version of the night's events, peppered with half-seen figures and contradictory recollections. Little by little, Puo gathered a puzzle's worth of odd details, each piece seemingly unconnected but hinting at darker revelations. Yet to come. By mid-morning, the sun had fully risen, and an icy winter light flooded the corridors of Farnworth Manor. Pooh strode through the main hall deep in thought. The hush that had settled over the estate was all the more eerie, for the bright sunlight glinting on marble floors and polished banisters. Despite the calm, he sensed the tension seed below the surface like rapids beneath thin ice. Inspector Barnaby approached, eye-stired but resolute. "Well, Puo, do you glean any sense of our suspect?" Puo paused at the foot of the grand staircase, gazing up at the portraits of long-deceased Farnsworth ancestors. "A sense, yes, but I am reminded that illusions can be maintained just as effectively by daylight as by candlelight." He turned with a thoughtful smile. "Have patience, Inspector. The truth is whispering at these walls, and I mean to hear every syllable. Chapter. Fear a second blow strikes. That very afternoon, the hush over fans with the manor was broken once more, but this time with a scream that seemed to cut through every quiet corner of the estate. It was a raw, desperate sound, unlike the earlier cry that had brought the company upon poor John's lifeless form. Within moments, concerned guests and servants were hurrying toward the music room, where the shriek still reverberated, off walls adorned with portraits and the gentle hush of velveteen drapes. A Puo had been conferring with Lord Farnsworth in the library, wasted no time in joining the gathering. Throng the moment. He stepped into the music room. He felt the atmosphere shift from uneasy confusion to utter horror. At the far end of the room, near the tall windows that overlooked the sloping grounds, an ornate gilded harp lay overturned. Beneath its curved pillar rested the fragile form of Miss Penelope, one of Lady Ayla's guests. The room fell silent, except for the ragged breathing of the onlookers who stood transfixed by the terrible sight. Puo moved swiftly, gently ushering aside those who blocked his path. Inspector Barnaby, who had arrived only seconds earlier, knelt to examine Miss Penelope's infant. His grave expression told Puo all he needed to know before he even reached the scene. Miss Penelope was beyond help, and Puo whispered, his gaze alighting on the contusion that circled her slender neck, a bruise that revealed all too clearly that this was no accident. He turned to Lady Aaliyah, who stood trembling at the threshold, her eyes wide with shock. "Madame," he said softly, "I must ask you and the other guests to wait in the adjoining sitting room. Inspector Barnaby and I must see to poor Miss Penelope." Lady Aaliyah's lips parted as though she meant to speak, but no words came. With a trembling nod, she retreated, followed by the distressed assembly. Their murmurs merged into a low drone of fear and speculation, broken by an occasional sob from one of the more sensitive souls alone with Inspector Barnaby Poirot in every detail of the music room, a scattering of sheet music near the piano, a vase toppled from its stand, water seeping into the rich carpet. A cushion cast aside on one of the velvet chairs, he bent closer to Miss Penelope's neck, noting the distinct pattern of the bruise. A large hand, perhaps, he murmured, or something. Akin to a cord, one cannot be certain. Until the good doctor arrives, Inspector Barnaby grunted in agreement. We shall know more once we can examine her properly. This is the second death in as many days. Poirot. I fear we have a desperate killer in our midst. Poirot gave a grave nod. It would appear so. And with each new blow, the culprit grows bolder or more careless. We must work quickly. Mon ami, or there may be yet another tragedy when they emerged from the music room, shutting the door behind them. To keep prying eyes away, Poirot found Lady Altha and Lord Farnsworth awaiting them. The latter's face was ashen beneath his neatly trimmed mustache. How could this happen again? Poirot, he demanded in hushed tones, in my home. Poirot laid a reassuring hand on the man's arm. I promise you I will not rest until I discover who has done this, but I will need everyone's cooperation. Then, spotting the circle of distraught guests, he spoke in a carrying voice. If you please, Masami, remain calm, my colleague inspector. Barnaby must speak to each of you again. You will each recall your movements this afternoon, yes. Every word, every step. A flurry of worried glances passed between the guests. Some wore guilt in their expressions. Others, terror or disbelief. Miss Clarissa Farnsworth, the young Ayas, clutched a lace handkerchief. Tears sliding down her cheeks. She was perfectly well. Not an hour ago, she managed to say, she played a small piece on the piano for me. Mr. Gardner, the Scully gentleman who had already come, under minor suspicion the previous day, removed his spectacles and polished them with shaking fingers. I heard her playing a waltz. It was quite beautiful. I assumed she was alone from the doorway. The butler, Mr. Hughes, entered discreetly. Sir, he addressed. Lord Farnsworth, Dr. Moley has arrived and awaits your instruction. Pooh glanced at Inspector Barnaby, who nodded. The doctor would no doubt confirm what they already suspected. Miss Penelope had been murdered. The question lingering over them was the same. As before, why? As the day wore on, the hush of shock settled deeper upon F.W., with manor rooms that had so recently rung with music and bright chatter now felt heavy with gloom. Guests huddled in small groups, whispering theories, each suspecting the other. At one point, Poirot observed an exchange between Rupert Farnsworth and Miss Clarissa, their eyes shifting nervously as they spoke in urgent tones. Elsa, where he caught sight of Thomas the footman, face-stricken, pausing mid-step whenever the name Miss Penelope was uttered. Yet for all their quiet hysteria, Pooh kept his composure. By late afternoon, as the pale light began to fade, he joined Inspector Barnaby in the library, where they spread out the meager clues they had collected. Thus far, a faint imprint of a muddy footprint had been discovered near the side entrance to the music room. A servant reported hearing something heavy strike the floor, but could not say precisely when. Another insisted they had glimpsed someone slipping away in the corridor with remarkable haste. Poirot leaned back in a leather armchair, tapping his fingertips together in a rhythmic manner that hinted at deep concentration. Our murderer is close, Inspector, with John. Perhaps there was secrecy, but with Miss Penelope the deed seems more desperate, yet also deliberate. These are not random attacks. Inspector Barnaby folded his arms, a furrow in his brow. I only hope we can stop them from striking again. Pooh's gaze darkened, as do I, mon ami, for the sake of those under this roof and for the sake of justice itself. Chapter 5, Shadows of Deceit. Late that afternoon, the weight of sorrow still pressed upon Farnsworth Manor. A chill wind had picked up outside, rattling the windows in their ancient casements. But inside, the house all felt unnaturally still, like a stage awaiting its next act. Hercule Poirot stood in the gilded library. its tall windows half shrouded by heavy brocade drapes. The scent of old leather bindings mixed with the faintest trace of lent the room a solemn air, yet it washer amid the countless shelves of carefully arranged books that Puo had summoned several shaken guests to speak with him. In private, a fire crackled in the marble fireplace, casting dancing shadows across the richly paneled walls. In this soft, flickering light, Inspector Barnaby examined a small notebook, a faint frown marking its usually composed features. The detective's presence was steady and reassuring, and those who filed in, pale-faced and tense, clung to the hope that, at last, they might make sense of the tragedies befalling them. First to arrive was Mr. Garter, the scholarly gentleman, his pince-nez perched precariously upon the bridge of his nose, as he approached Puo with a tremulous smile. "Forgive me if I appear anxious," he said, voice quavering. "The events of these past days have distressed us all." Puo inclined his head. "Bansur, M. Garter, pray be seated, Inspector Barnaby, and I wish only to clarify certain points." He gestured to a plush armchair near the hearth. "You mentioned once, did you not, that you were seeking a particular book in this very library on the night of John's death? Would you describe this book for us, if you please?" Mr. Gardner dabbed his brow with a handkerchief. "A treatise on horticulture penned by one of Lord Farnsworth's ancestors. Fascinating, or so I believed." He paused, fiddling nervously with his spectacles. "But with the masquerade in full swing, I found it impossible to concentrate. I left soon after." Inspector Barnaby's tone was cordial, but firm. "Did you notice anyone lingering here? Someone behaving oddly, perhaps in a rush?" The man hesitated. "I cannot say for certain. I was distracted by the music and voices echoing through the corridors." But he pursed his lips. "I do recall glimpsing a figure passing swiftly outside the library door, dressed in dark clothing." "Quite possibly." A cloakpoo's eyes gleamed. "A cloak. Many guests wore elaborate costumes. Yet it may be important." Mr. Garter nodded, swallowing hard. "I thought nothing of it at the time. I assumed it was a guest who wished to remain unseen, which, given the nature of the masquerade, did not strike me as altogether strange." Once Mr. Garter had been gently dismissed, Miss Clarissa Farnsworth, the young IS, was shown in. Her eyes were rimmed with fatigue. She clasped her hands together, trying to steady them. "Miss Puo," she murmured, curtsying awkwardly. "I only wish I could be of more help." "And you shall, my dear." Pooh said kindly. He waited for her to settle upon a sofa, covered in embroidered cushions, the night Miss Penelope was found. "Did you see or hear anything before she was discovered beneath the harp?" Clarissa trembled at the memory, only the faint sound of the harp strings, as though someone had knocked against them. "Then I heard her scream. So dreadful, I rushed in, but by then it was." She closed her eyes. Inspector Barnaby nodded gravely. "You recall no footsteps in the corridor, no voices raised in argument." She shook her head. "Only the storm of panic that followed. Mr. Gardner and Lord Farnsworth's cousin Rert arrived soon after. I remember Mr. Gardner exclaiming something about the overturned vase. Then Lady Ayla was there, and we realized Miss Penelope was gone." Puo offered a sympathetic smile. "Mercy mele, Clarissa. If you think of any detail, however small, do let us know." When Clarissa departed, Inspector Barnaby's gaze followed her. "Out, poor girl," he murmured. "She seems terrified." Puo nodded. 2 deaths in so short a span would shake even the steadiest of souls. It does not help that Farnsworth Manor is so remote, with no respite from suspicion. Their next interviewee was Thomas the footman who had found John's body. He entered with a hesitant bow and stood hat in hand, eyes darting nervously about. Pooh, Inspector," he began, voice tense. "I've tried to recall anything else of use, but I fear I'm no better than I was before. The house was in an uproar last night. People running about, so many tears." Puo studied him carefully. "Tell me, Thomas, have you observed any unusual behavior amongst the guests, any heated arguments or secret meetings?" Thomas hesitated. "There was some whispering in the servants' wing, rumor about Miss Penelope having a disagreement with Lord Farnsworth's cousin. But I never put much stock in gossip now. With her passing," he trailed off, swallowing hard. Puo modded. "Rumors often contain a kernel of truth." "Thank you, Thomas. That will be all for the moment." Left alone with Inspector Barnaby, Pooh took a thoughtful turn around the library, running his Fingertips over the spines of neatly arrayed volumes we have. Myriad 3, Inspector, he said quietly. A cloak glimpsed here a whispered argument. There a lingering presence in the corridors. Yet how do these threads weave into a single tapestry, Inspector? Barnaby exhaled a weary breath. We must identify who among the household stands to gain from these misdeeds. If there's a pattern, it lies somewhere in these secrets. Each person guards Pooh's gaze flickered to a row of leather-bound ledges we the secret. Motives, they rarely remain hidden for long. One must merely look closely. And as I often say, use the little gray cells, we shall discover what drives our murderer. And then his voice dropped to a murmur. We will draw back the mask. A hush settled over. The gilded library, broken only by the crackle of the fire in that silence, Poirot. And Inspector Barnaby silently vowed to unearth the truth before more tragedy could strike. Chapter 6: Moonlit Footsteps and Shrouded Motives. Nightfall came swiftly to Farnworth Manor, bringing with it an air of disquiet that seemed to settle in every corridor and chamber. A pale moon hung low in the sky, its silvery light casting elongated shadows through the mulled windows. In the hush that followed supper, a meal, taken in uneasy silence, nerves were frayed, and every footstep reverberated like an ominous drumbeat. Hercule Poirot, ever vigilant, moved along the dimly lit passageways with measured calm, his keen gaze passing over each flickering sconce and draped tapestry, as though they might conceal some clue he had just turned into the east wing. When he nearly collided with young Miss Clarissa Farnsworth, her face was flushed, and her eyes brimmed with a secret alarm. Miss Poirot, she breathed, pressing a trembling hand to her bosom. I did not mean to startle you, Poirot bowed graciously. Mademoiselle Clarissa, you appear shaken. What is troubling you at this hour? She hesitated, glancing around to be sure they were alone. I heard something in my aunt's boudoir. Not long ago, hushed voices. Speaking of dreadful things, a debt to be paid. The removal of obstacles, I could not discern the speakers, only that one was female. The other male it frightened. Me Pooh studied her expression, indeed, that is most peculiar, and perhaps most important. Did you hear anything more distinct, perhaps, so of names? No. She whispered, her eyes darting to the shadows. I feared being caught. Eavesdropping, so I slipped away, but as oh my P.O., with all that has happened, the murders, I am terrified. He placed a reassuring hand on her arm. Courage, miss. You have done well to tell me. This conversation may prove significant. Now, go to your chamber, lock your door. Let me be the one to piece together this puzzle. When Clarissa departed, Poirot lingered, turning over her words in his mind. Debt-removing obstacles, could these phrases connect the two tragic deaths, or hint at a potential third? He felt certain that beneath Farnworth Manor refined veneer lay an intricate web of motives. The moonlit corridors whispered of secrets and resentment. Pooh paused near a tall window, peering into the courtyard below. There in the wavering gloom he glimpsed a figure wrapped in a black cloak hurrying across the gravel paths. Just as swiftly as it appeared, the shadow melted into the obscurity of a yew hedge. Pooh's pulse quickened. He considered giving chase, but decided against it. The figure could easily vanish amid the outbuildings, and there was more to be gained by careful observation than by a hasty pursuit in the dark. Instead, he made his way to the small reading alcove, adjacent to the drawing room, where Inspector Barnaby had set up a temporary command post of sorts, a modest table, strewn with notes, statements, and other records. They had gathered since the footman's death. Barnaby looked up as Poirot entered, his features etched with fatigue. You've seen something? Poirot inclined his head. A cloaked figure in the courtyard, though it vanished, and Mademoiselle Clarissa has overheard a most disconcerting conversation. Barnaby scribbled a note. Another mystery in an already tangled affair. I don't like it. Poirot, not one bit. The house is growing restless. The guests are in an uproar, and Lady Aaliyah is beside herself. Pooh sat down, a small lamp. He had carried all the more reason for us to remain level-headed. My friend, I suspect tonight will bring further revelations. He paused, then added, softly, I only hope no further harm comes to any within these walls. The hush of the manor thickened. The hours crept toward midnight at some point. Poirot took to the corridors once more, guided by an almost pro-natural intuition that something was astir. But aside from an occasional flash of a candle from under a guest room door, the halls were empty. Eventually he allowed himself a brief rest. Morning dawned gray and sullen, blanketing the surrounding countryside in a soft haze after dressing quickly. Poirot proceeded downstairs. He noticed at once a flurry of subdued commotion near the billiard room. The door stood ajar and a knot of guests, Rupert Farnsworth, among them, milled about, wearing expressions of startled confusion. "Poirot," Rupert called, beckoning him inside. "You must see this." Poirot stepped through closely, followed by Inspector Barnaby. The scene that greeted them made his brows rise in surprise propped upon. The green baize of the billiard table lay a mask. It was embellished with bright feathers, sin in its elongated beak-like design. No body lay nearby, no outward sign of violence marred. The plush carpet. Yet something about this solitary mask struck a disturbing chord. "Whose mask is that?" Barnaby demanded of the assembled onlookers. A trembling voice came from one of the guests. "Mr. Gardner, the scholarly gentleman, I cannot be certain." Inspector, so many were distributed that night, and each passed through multiple hands. His spectacles glinted in the weekday light. Rupert Farnsworth ran a hand through his hair. "It looks different," he missed. "Surely it was not among those we wore for the masquerade. Did someone bring it here after Miss Penelope's death as a warning?" Poirot approached the table, carefully lifting the mask by its edge. She turned it over, noting a curious scroll inside, faint bouton. "Mistakable, a Manichi indeed," he said. "Quietly, there is a single letter drawn. Here L, whether it belongs to the mask's maker or stands for something else, I do not yet know." Inspector Barnaby shot Poirot a grave look. "It's a message of that, I am certain. Another piece in this twisted game, but by whom?" Poirot returned the mask to Thedable. "That, Inspector, is the question on all our minds. Our killer is brazen, enough to leave a token, perhaps to taunt us or to confuse us. Nevertheless, we must persist in our pursuit. Each clue brings us closer to unveiling the truth." With that, he surveyed the tense faces gathered around, panic and suspicions whirled in their eyes, each uncertain where the next blow might fall. Poirot, for his part, only felt his resolve deepen. The darkness cloaking FS with mana must be dispelled, or it would consume them all. Chapter 7. A Tangle of Accusations. The grand salon at Farnworth Manor was a spectacle of fading splendor. Gilded mirrors reflected the weak winter light, heavy velvet drapes muted the waning afternoon sun, and an ornate chandelier loomed above like a silent sentinel. Yet in that majestic room the atmosphere was fraught with tension. Guests and members of the household gathered at Hercule Poirot's behest, clustering uneasily upon brocade seize or standing behind chairs as though seeking some semblance of security. The strain on every countenance revealed that suspicions were running dangerously high. Poirot, his posture immaculate as ever, stood at the front of the salon near the unlit fireplace. His keen eyes swept across the assembled company. "May Army," he began, his gentle accent lending an oddly soothing note to the tension we have endured. "Tragedy upon tragedy within these walls, and yet it is my conviction that the truth remains persistent. Nesses I. Pa, if we would but open our eyes to it." The silence that followed was broken by a ruling of skirts and the creak of an antique chair. Finally, Inspector Barnaby, stationed off to one side, cleared his throat. "We ask for your cooperation," he said, his voice weighted with urgency. "No more half answers, no more evasion when he'd facts, lest another life be lost." A murmur rippled through the gathering. Lady Ala Farnsworth, pale but composed, inclined her head ever so slightly. "Yes," she said in a low voice. "We must not allow this fiend to strike again under my roof." Poirot's gaze traveled over Farnsworth, whose face was drawn with worry, over Miss Clarissa, fidgeting with a lace handkerchief, over Mr. Gardner, tapping a foot in restless anxiety. The butler, Mr. Hughes, stood the edge of the room, hands clasped before him in a posture of rigid decorum. Each figure seemed enveloped in their own private turmoil. "Let us examine," Poirot continued, "the most recent events. The appearance of the mysterious mask upon the billiard table bearing the letter L. I ask you, who among us might that initial signify, or is it but a symbol meant to distract? His mustache twitched with quiet fervor. Nothing is ever as it seems, a coupon of anxious. Voices erupted. Surely it is not a reference to Lord Farnsworth, exclaimed Mr. Gardner, looking at the master of the house. I swear to you, Lord Farnsworth said, stepping forward, I know nothing of this. My name is Edmund Farnworth. I bear no such initial. Rupert Farnworth, overshadowed by his cousins. 2.